A wonderful introduction. And thank you everyone for joining today. I'm so excited to share with you this research and this practice and really listen to some of the questions and ideas that you have because that's what drives us forward in the culture of government. I want to thank InnovateUS and the Burns Center at Northeastern for sponsoring this, as well as the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Institute, which sponsored the research and was a partner on what I'm about to present, as well as my co-author, Neil Kleiman, who is a guiding light in so much of this innovation work in government. And with that, let me share with you some slides here that it's going to guide us through our discussion today. And uh, we are here to talk about culture. So if you were thinking this was something else, it's the wrong workshop. We're here in the culture of government workshop. So what defines the workplace culture in government and how do you begin to change that? And we all know how important culture is, right? Culture is the water in the fishbowl. If it's clean and nourishing, the fish thrive. But if it's toxic, the fish will die. And the thing is, if it's the water, when it's clean, you can't actually see it. But when it's toxic, boy, is it obvious. And isn't that the truth about culture? So when it's toxic, it's super obvious. When it's clean, it's hard to see. And so what I'm like to share with you today are some tips and techniques to see it even when it's clean. And if it's toxic, find some ways to start cleaning that water out so your fish will thrive. And see, the thing is, there is so much written about the culture in business. Like you go into any Hudson News at any airport, you can find 15 magazines that are talking about culture. You got the Fast Company, the Bloomberg Inc., and they're all giving you tips on what to do. But when it comes to changing the culture of government, now we did this long, in-depth academic lit review, and guess what we found? The culture of government is a problem. Gosh, that's not really all that helpful for us in government, is that? So what I'm here to do today is to help you try to change that. And because it's not the same as it is in business. As you all know, government culture is different. There's a lot we can learn from the business literature and actually vice versa, but it's not the same. The fishbowl transparency of government right off the bat makes it very different for how you think about it as a workplace and how we begin to change it. Because imagine any of these entrepreneurs bragging about their culture, but bringing media in, embedding into their organization. How would their investors feel about that transparency around every decision? It is different. We have so many different missions. It doesn't mean that success is easy to measure. And then as we think about change, we have civil service rules often. That means that change takes time. It takes patience. And so you can't just quickly change the hiring and the promotion. No, we have to work through these rules over time. And plus, we have elections. So that means we are planning on administrative change. And so right off the bat, these are a lot of ways that culture is different in government. But it is still the game changer. It is still the difference between good and great. And through this research, we figured out how to see the culture, how to make it not invisible, and how to begin defining a better path, how to begin defining higher productivity, higher performing culture. And that's what I want to share with you today. What are some of these steps that you can do to increase the performance of your organizational culture? So this comes out of a multi-year research endeavor that Neil and I undertook, producing the City Leader Guide on Organizational Culture Change. And yes, we did focus specifically on some deep dives within cities. We've also worked extensively at the state level and the federal level, and have examples to share from all different levels of government. This research reflects input from hundreds of professionals, leaders, and frontline workers around the country. And what I'm going to share with you today is really some steps that can take it through. So first off, I'm going to walk you through some of the bits of assessing culture. We're going to practice some of those in the course of this workshop. I'm going to share with you what we are calling the culture cascade, which is the step-by-step program. And through all that, highlight some examples, mostly of things that work, but in some cases of things that don't work too, because we learn from that as well. So what is culture? What is culture? So it can seem like this total maze for us. It can seem like we're lost in it and we don't know where to start, how to define it, how to say what our culture is in our government. But let's make it simple. Culture is the shared habits. Culture is the shared habits and the unwritten rules that determine how work actually gets done. So what do I mean by shared habits? So uh, habits are those things that you do on autopilot, that you do without thinking, like waking up in the morning and brushing your teeth. So you don't have to think about it, you just do it. If you have certain ways of results-oriented meetings, you might start every meeting reviewing the agenda and then concluding with the action items. And you don't even have to think about that because that's become a habit. Um, or maybe some habits that we don't like as much in government. When you have clerks that review documents and at the first error, they spit it out and send it back to the applicant. Uh, or other habits might be when you hit a roadblock. Is the habit in your workplace to reach out for help? Is that a teamwork oriented culture? Or is the habit to move on to the next problem and come back to it later? That might be a more siloed culture. When you've missed a deadline, is the habit right away to reschedule it? Perhaps a more reactive culture? Or as the deadline's approaching, is the habit to pull out the stops and stay up through the night working on it? Maybe that's a high energy culture. So these habits, these unwritten rules, shape how work actually gets done. And these are the habits and unwritten rules that we're going to talk about today. So it's often easiest to see culture when you're new to it, because when you're sitting inside of it, it is so obvious. It becomes invisible, just like the water in the fish tank. So, for example, when you start a new job or you moved into a new role, what did you notice? So I can tell you, I started working with an innovation team some years back, and it really surprised me. I walked in the first day and it was quiet. It was like a library. It was everyone sitting in their rows, very calmly working at their desks. And what I learned is that it was a culture of silos and that each person in the team worked on separate projects and there wasn't a lot of teamwork there. Um, or like when you look at how meetings happen, are meetings about everyone showing up? Are they really stop when the decision's made? In another workplace, we had meetings that did emphasize very large attendance. Part of the culture that I was trying to create was one of transparency, of communication, of access to executives. On the flip side, that everyone showing up also created a very consultative culture as opposed to a decision-making culture, where we spent a lot of time asking people's opinions as opposed to trying things out. So what I'd like to do now is just as you're coming into this and you're thinking about the workplace culture that you have, I'd like to hear you put some ideas into the chat. What are 2 or 3 words that describe the workplace culture? Remember, this chat is not recorded. This is not going anywhere beyond the folks in this room. So we're going to have real Chatham House rules for the chat here. And let's hear some of what are some characteristics of the workplace? If you were to ask new hires what's different or what characterizes it, what would they say? If you're trying to hire someone and you say what motivates people at work, what do they say? I see on the one hand that there's already fascinating things coming in, right? We see it's collaborative and dedicated in one place. In another place, competency gets punished. We see another place, it's passionate, and another is stable, status quo. Right? And so all these values that we describe in our workplace, these are the things that shape how our work actually gets done. These are the values that drive decision making. These are the values that attract people to come work for us. And that if they don't sync with these values either change them or they leave. And so a culture gets to be self-propagating that way. These values, like fast-paced, remote staff, can create a high performance for some people and anxiety for others. So part of what we're trying to do here today is start to recognize these values and then look at what impact does this culture have on performance. So Agata, if you could pull up our first poll here, I'd like to ask folks, what impact does culture have on performance? Is culture something that's driving the performance of your organization? Is it help a lot? Or is the culture getting away of the results? And so as you're thinking about these specific values in the culture and the specific habits, think back, like, is this the culture that really helps us get the results we need? Is this a culture that increases our productivity and our performance? Or is it standing a barrier? Let's give people another minute or two to hone in on this poll. Looks like we got our already quite a few responses coming in. So we'll give it another minute and then we can share the results up. And you begin assessing your culture, a simple question like this can reveal huge differences from team to team. Does the culture drive or impede performance? And you'll find in terms of different roles in the organization or different tenures, people have different views on this. But right away, this gives us a baseline to think about where we need to get to. So looks like we got large attendance here. So why don't we pull up the results and see what these look like? So I think you all can see here. Now, interesting, look, we have a nice range. We have about a quarter of the people saying the culture really helps performance. And that is so heartening to hear because we all want to work in a place where we feel like our values are reflected in the workplace around us and where it's helping us do the best work we can. But I see also a third, almost 40% of folks saying the culture hurts or even hurts a lot. And so the question is, how do we lean in to the aspects of the performance that help, the culture that help performance, and how do we change the portions of culture that hurt performance? So just a quick distinction between strategy on the one hand and culture. And oftentimes we focus on developing strategic plans. And so we have a vision. We say, what are our goals? What are the specific metrics we'll measure those goals around? What are the initiatives that'll drive performance on those metrics? And what you find is when you focus just on those initiatives, you might get to some results, but they might not stick after you turn your head. And that's where culture comes in. Culture is the how you work. It is the values that support those goals. It is the leadership that embodies those metrics. It's the habits that makes those initiatives succeed. And that's how we get to enduring results. So I encourage you as you're looking at your strategic planning to also look at your cultural planning and vice versa. These things really do need to mesh to drive a high performance culture. And I encourage you as you have questions that you want to discuss in the later part of this the workshop, please do start adding questions into the chat or the Q&A and we'll be surfacing those and coming back to those in a little bit. So what actually drives us to change our culture? So sometimes we find that it is staff engagement reasons, right? That we aren't able to hire the people we want to hire or people aren't showing up about work. Maybe there's some outside in pressures. Maybe there's a mandate for change, or maybe there's some media looking at certain parts of the culture. Or maybe we're talking about some new challenges that have come up and the way that we responded to the pandemic, switching very quickly to remote work, to much more independent decision making, to a different way of engaging constituents. Now we're looking at how AI might be reshaping our culture. So these are all reasons that can create that mandate for change. And I will tell you, one of the biggest questions that comes up is folks who say, I want to see some specific changes in our culture, but I don't know how to get the leadership to listen and to buy into it. These levers are ways that you can begin to make the case to help people understand the need to reshape culture for higher performance. So I'm going to ask another question here and ask, like, how much has the workplace culture changed in the last 5 years? And this also is let's pull up the next poll, Agata. And this is also a very good diagnostic for you to understand within the different departments, the different agencies, the different units, like how much change has there been? What has driven that change? And what have the results been? And so where we see it in a lot of places where there hasn't been a lot of change, sometimes there's a mismatch between our organizational culture and the challenges and mission that we have. Uh, in other cases, we've changed a lot. And boy, oh boy, I am looking at the results coming in. And I can't wait to share these with you. So sometimes the culture is changing, but it's not towards a specific end. It's in reaction to changes. And then we look back in 5 years and say, gosh, what motivates the folks around me is very different. Our habits are very different. And we didn't really think about how we got there. So as we think about change, we can also be more intentional about it as well. Uh, So with that, let's go ahead and share the results here. There we go. And look at that. We're seeing a lot of folks here who've seen very significant change in their organization. In fact, the majority of folks here have seen a lot of change in their culture. So I would love to start seeing in the chat now, what are some of those changes you've seen? What are the things that are different about your workplace culture now than it was a few years ago? What are those changes? And what are the causes of change? What are some of the things that you saw that drove you and your colleagues to change the culture in the past years? So let's include some of these things in the chat and we can come back to that around the discussion. So what caused the culture to change a little bit or change a lot in the last 5 years? I see. And right now we see that we had organizational change, leadership change, uh, remote work, a new administration. I see a lot around remote work. And these things can change. And now we're seeing a drive to come back to the office. And so, how do we intentionally embrace those elements about remote and hybrid work that worked better and bring those back to the office? How do we be intentional about these changes since we now have time to do that? So, it does take a lot of time to change culture. We can have a shift, like a remote work, that does cause that shock to the system. But generally, when we're looking about changes that are really going to stick, we should be thinking 5+ years. This is true in business and it's true in government. Why does it take 5+ years? Well, it takes 5+ years because a CEO can start to change the culture, but it only becomes self-perpetuating when it attracts certain people to work there and reinforces those habits and values those people have. And the change, we're changing one or two things a year in terms of our skills or habits. Organizations simply can't change more than that. It takes time to hire and to promote people who reflect the culture, especially when we're looking at supervisors and managers, and that is where the culture is going to be embodied for years to come beyond an administration. So it does take time. Uh, it is something that you do need to focus on just one, maybe two changes a year. Any more than that, and people get overwhelmed with the amount of change and end up changing nothing at all. It takes repetition. You need to repeat it till your team is able to repeat it. It takes the commitment from your leaders and your staff. You need to keep focusing on the things that really matter and repeating those until they stick in the organization. And I got to say, you got to watch out for some of these legacy HR and data systems that embody the way things always have been. It might get in your way of changing. And really, this culture change, it does take focus, repetition, and patience. And it might get boring to you to repeat over and over, but for those around you, they filter it out 3, 5, and it takes 7 times of repeating before you get through. So this is what the culture change is about. It's not necessarily rocket science, but it is discipline and it is commitment. So what are these steps? What does the research tell us? So what we found in the research is that there's 3 large buckets that you go through, and that if you jump to the end, you wind up with chaos. So there's actually an order here that it works on. And it really begins with the leadership alignment, with setting the stage. And I'm going to go through each of these steps in a little more detail and share with you some more examples. We have the leadership alignment where we set the stage. We then cascade that into the communications and decision making, where we begin to walk what we've been talking. And then the way you get to stick is embedding it into your HR systems, into your data systems. So let's look at this in practice. So first off, the vision and values. This is the why of what we're doing. The why. It's in a phrase, what's this new way of working? It's the values are what motivate our decisions. The values are what attract people to come work for us. The values are what shift us responding one way or a different way in a crisis. And the vision is what shows our colleagues that we can enable better outcomes through concrete behaviors that reflect these values. How do we boil it down to a phrase that's a new way of working? And I'll give you an example here. This example is from Louisville. And when the new mayor came in, Mayor Fisher, he brought a language that reflected the intended changes. And he came through with a lot of specific ways of describing problems and describing changes. He talked about the weakness orientation, this is not that we're weak, it's that we're always focusing on what's that thing we're weak at, where we could do better. So what's that daily improvement? And then also on breakthrough innovation. Breakthrough innovation doesn't happen every day, but it's something we need to be open for and create opportunities around. And so by focusing the organization on this weakness orientation and continual improvement and breakthrough innovation that'll be noticeable throughout the city, he was able to launch this change. And so that comes up to the next step, which is the senior staff really reflecting the values. And I must say that this is a spot that a lot of folks get wrong. We talk about the direction we want to go, but then in terms of our senior team, we let them each keep doing their own way. And it only works when the entire leadership team are proxies for your department head, your agency head, your CEO, your governor, your mayor, that the governor is only in one room at a time. But the people who report to the governor are in many other rooms. And that's how we begin to share the cultures that share the values that shape the culture. And people are going to look to their senior leader, they're going to look to their manager to reflect that. And one way we can begin to do this is with our leadership meetings or cabinet meetings to really pulse check on how well we're aligning to these values. So, for example, you could say, we are driving to more use of data in our organization. And I want to hear from each of you, what's one way that you use data with your team this past week? What's one decision that your team made that embodied, that really reflected great use of data? And so that's a way that you can begin to use these cabinet meetings to pulse check and to start to hold each other accountable for these values. And from a assessment perspective, we can just start looking at a simple traffic light assessment. So maybe some executives are really championing these vision and values. Like we got one department head who's so data oriented, but not others. So that might be a more nascent nascent alignment. Or maybe we're seeing folks really talk about it consistently. So we have some emerging alignment. But is it to the point where they're really personally modeling these visions and these values? Where if it's a data-oriented culture we're aiming for, where we see each member of the senior team actually using data to run their area in the government and to look for their staff to bring decisions reflecting data. So this is the second step. This is around how do we align our leadership team. And the third part of getting our leadership team in place is we talk about decision mechanisms. This one's a little bit more abstract, or might seem a little more abstract. So one of the differences between government and business is business, you see a lot more similarity of education, whether it's the MBA, whether it's the engineering degree, but you find people who have a more similar pathway. Whereas in government, we're bringing leaders in from all different walks of life. Some people have risen up through the ranks, other people who've just come in as part of an administration change, maybe people who are mid-career shifting directions. And so we have lots of different ways that we make decisions. And those decisions then reflect different value sets. And so the question here is, how do we make that decision making reflect the values in a way that's obvious to folks, right? Because the medium is the message here. It's around explaining why decisions are made and that explanation tying back to the specific habits, the specific values that you're looking for in your culture. And perhaps the most famous one here is CompStat, of course. And you might be a fan of CompStat, you might be a foe of CompStat, but what's inarguable about it is that in terms of commander accountability and data-driven tactics, it's a decision-making framework that embodies police commanders using data to explain their tactics around fighting crime and creating safety in communities. And that model is one it can be copied again and again, and it consistently reflects certain values in decision making. So not to say you need to go to a CompStat direction, but that it is one way to bring these values to life. So let's move on to this second phase of the cascade. This is where we're really getting out into the ranks of the organization. So we've been at the leadership level. Now we're getting out to our senior managers, to our managers, and we're creating some two-way communication here, because it's not just enough about telling, it's about inspiring. It's around the what, so the mission and the strategy, the why, so getting people to share and to believe in the culture, and the how, so the skills that are going to move things forward. And so interactive ways of communicating can be done in a group, like a town hall. It can be done individually in a performance review. And both of these mechanisms and others need to reflect the changes you're looking for in the communication, in the culture. So as we think about the hybrid work we've been in and how that's changed the culture in the organization, and perhaps return to the office mandates we might have now, how are we grabbing those important ways that worked better in the hybrid, bringing those into our back to the office culture, and reinforcing them in our town halls, in our team meetings, and our performance reviews. And so to give you an example here is from Kansas City of two-way communication is a resident survey. And so a lot of places do surveys, and a lot of places do surveys, and then the data sit there. And what's different about the Kansas City survey is it moved it into the budget. And so it created this closed loop around the communications so that input from the survey winds up driving the budget. And that then leads to a higher response rate in the survey as well. Next step is we really think about how do we drive this into the organization is around the policies and the budgets. And the thing to remember here is if you don't tell the story, if you don't say why this policy is being rolled out, people will draw their own conclusion. So if we're pushing out AI into the workplace, what is the reason for AI? What is the need to do it? Is it because recent new hires are used to using it and we need to create a safe framework around it to protect data and protect vulnerable constituents? Is it because we have too much data ingested and we are not able to draw enough insights from it? Are we trying to increase the pace of change or experimentation? If we don't give these reasons, we're more likely to get stories like we're doing AI to eliminate jobs. And that's not a story that we want to have out there if there's all these positive reasons to be doing it. So how do we create those stories around it that are really going to drive a positive uptake and show how major budgetary efforts, major policy changes really do reflect those values? And now, as we really start to get into the organization, we get into the training and the incentives. And this can be where the rubber meets the road for a lot of folks. This is how we create the skills and ability to live in this new culture. And too often, we're doing training around what's required for compliance, what's required for the last problem we had, and we're not training around the specific mindsets and behaviors that are going to help us solve problems in the future. And so there isn't a lot of training that one person can absorb at once. So in an organization, we need to think about what's one thing that we could do. What's one thing that we could do? And so I want to turn to the chat a bit and just ask you to share as you're thinking about training opportunities in your organization. Is there a habit that you want to train people out of? Is there a mindset that you want to train people into? And so as we're thinking about some of the changes that have gone on in your culture in the past few years, where those changes have been positive, what is it about that positive change that's going to increase performance? And let's start bringing some of these ideas into the chat. What are some of the ways that there's the mindset that's shared by your top performers? And as we can begin to focus on what's one mindset, that can be the basis of training priorities to drive successful culture change. So I'll give you this example. And this example comes from Somerville, Massachusetts. And so the mayor is trying to create this innovation culture. And the way he describes it is, we're looking for funky ideas. We're looking for funky ideas. And so what does that mean? Well, funky ideas, they're pretty funky, I guess, right? And so the way he creates incentives around it, he says, each month at our department heads meeting, I'm looking for one funky idea. And so I want anyone to nominate within their department a funky idea. And we're going to pick what's one really innovative idea, and we're going to elevate that. We're going to present that to the senior team. And then I'm going to invite them and their family to come back to the mayor's office for coffee. Now, this mayor's first name was Joe. And so the winners will get a cup of Joe as they drink their coffee with the mayor. And so, what are some of these ideas? A brass band festival in a town square, a boxing club at the parks. So, these are ideas that are out of the box that create that reward funky thinking. And so I see in the chat some of the ideas coming through here. Some of the mindsets are around creativity and being adaptable, around self-motivation, creativity, learning, listening, and trusting. These are big ideas, and it's impossible to get an organization that isn't doing these to whole hog embrace any of these big ideas all at once. So we need to hone in on what is it about active listening that we want to do, and how do we begin training our managers, our supervisors, and eventually our staff around active listening. And that might be a year-long or even a 2-year-long endeavor to get that one mindset that defines high performance more widely shared in the organization. And then, people ask all the time, how do we get these culture changes to last beyond one administration? And I'll tell you, if they don't last, then it's not culture change. So hiring and promotion, this is perhaps the biggest lever. So like, how are you selecting who comes in and how those hires, how those promotions reflect the values? Two quick examples here. One, a city that was trying to drive innovation across agencies created a small pool of one innovation fellow in each agency to act as a point person for the central innovation office. So rather than creating a big innovation team, create a very small innovation team and then point people in each department so that every agency's leadership team could see that we're looking for innovation, we're looking for people to try out new things. Second example, police department. And so police department, new commander comes in, says, I can't fill all the beats because people aren't showing up for work. Attendance matters to me. I want everyone to unless you're injured on duty or really sick, show up for work on time and walk your beat. Okay, so a mandate. But how did this commander actually get that to stick? What the commander did is said, I know you guys want to be promoted for sergeant. If you want to be eligible to take the sergeant exam, you need to have an exemplary attendance record. If you want to be eligible for the promotion, you need to live this value, which is high attendance. And so that one change to the promotional criteria had a huge shift over the following year of attendance across the department because it showed that hiring and promotion was based in the value that the commander was talking about. And here we're getting to perhaps some of the hardest parts of it, which is really how we get into the data systems, the technology plans that bring these to life. And so in so much of the private sector, we see nudge built into our tech systems that guide certain behaviors. This is possible in government too. It's not a way we often think about it. I'll give you a quick example that's maybe an easier way as we think about work order systems in a regulatory department, say inspections. You can prioritize inspections on a first in, first out basis, on a who referred the inspection. Was it a complaint? Was it an elected official? You can do it on a risk-based assessment. And these different ways of scheduling the inspections reflect the values in the organization. So we could inspect buildings because this is the day we inspected the building last year, or we can inspect buildings because based on these data, this is the one that is the highest risk, the one that's most likely to have a finding. And by orienting our data systems around those values, whether that's responsiveness to constituents, whether that's data-driven decisioning, we can then bring those into our daily habits at work. And looking ahead, So many of us, we're all thinking about where's AI, what's happening with AI, how's it going to change our culture? Is it going to support a mindset of curiosity, or is it more of a CYA mentality? If we really want our organization to embrace AI effectively, how are the leaders talking about their personal use of AI tools? It's a great way to walk the talk, to embody this yourself. Will AI put a premium on critical thinking? And if so, how will we hire? How will we train? How will we promote around that? And as we look at new hires, what will new hires expect? And will we be able to hire quality candidates who will drive performance in our organization? These are the types of questions we need to look at as we begin to move into this AI-enabled culture. And so with that, I got to tell you, take a step. Take a step. It's yes, you're gonna trip, you're gonna fall, but let's take a step because every culture change does begin with a first step. And I'll conclude before we turn to our discussion, sharing with you a link and a QR code if you'd like to download the research yourself and read more. And now I'm looking forward to the discussion. I welcome your questions and comments. Again, this is Alexander Shermansong. Thank you so much for coming to join me to talk about the culture of government and how we can increase performance by addressing the culture of the place where we work. Thank you.